Welcome to the new sound of online radio. Welcome to the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network. 'Cause you make me feel like I've been locked out of heaven. A mix of today's hits and hard-to-find favorites, combined with the most entertaining and intriguing talk anywhere. This is your sound. This is the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network at UBNradio.com. This is the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network at UBNradio.com.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Security Guy Radio with Chuck. John, I don't have a nickname for myself. Are you there, John?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I don't have a nickname today. I'm off my mark here with all these new technical fangled lights, and I got to look at myself on camera. It drives me a little wacky, but it's Chuck Harold, but you're John Wannabe Walters today. My very special guest, John Wannabe Walters, the wannabe fill-in host and DJ. How you doing, buddy?
Good. How are you? How you been? I'm glad to see you're moving up in the world.
Well, I'm having a lot of fun over here. It's a great new station. Just learning all the equipment, all the technical stuff. And since we're on a live video feed right now, it's just a little awkward for me to understand how all this stuff works. We're having a good time. So we're on episode 114. Do you remember what your episode was? I think it was like, I don't know, in the 60s, I think, when you came on, right?
My first one? Yeah. It was, I believe it was in the 60s.
Yeah. So what's going on in your world? Anything new, exciting? John, by the way, is a maritime and aviation expert. And tell us a little about your background, John. People can find the interesting about how you helped form TSA.
Oh, wow. Well, it was a funny thing when TSA wanted to start, they didn't have anything in the books. It was let's start a new agency. So they decided they were going to, look for law enforcement folks and stuff. So we started, and they said, who can go to Oklahoma for 2 weeks? And I raised my hand, so I became one of the first people for TSA.
That's the technical aspect. How it all started. Just raising your hand. That's how the government does stuff. Now, some might argue that they still don't have something in place. That's another discussion someday. But
yeah.
I mean, I travel around quite a bit lately, and every time I go to an airport, there's a different procedure and a different way they do it, different methodology. It's kind of a little frustrating.
Yeah.
Now. Anything?
Yeah, it is, and it's because everybody shakes their head yes when they say you understand these procedures, and then when they go back and run their reports, then they decide that they're going to do it their way.
Well, sustainability is the whole key, right? Because I can teach you all the procedures in the world, but if you can't keep doing them, it's useless. This is what cracks me up. You have a manual with 500 things in it, and the average security person can remember about 3 of them, and that's the challenge. So one of the things we talk about, of course, in this show all the time is active shooters. And what was your experience with active shooters at the TSA or in the ports? Because you work in the ports now. So what have you done as far as active shooting stuff at those 2 locations?
Well, we actually trained in actually boarding airplanes and during active shooters. But, while we were doing the training, we were in San Jose, and we actually had to respond to LAX when you remember back, I believe it was in around 2002, 2003, we had the guy in the Bradley International Terminal at the El Al Airlines that opened fire inside the terminal.
A non-terrorist act.
Pardon?
A non-terrorist act, they classified it.
Yeah, it was non-terrorist. Yes. Right. Yeah, I know. And it was actually one of their own security guards that shot the guy before he could do any more damage. So, but as far as in the ports, a lot of training, but nothing live, thank God, but they do believe that it can happen. So they do actively train and put preventative measures in place, in case something like that could happen.
Now, it just so happens, as it usually happens on this show, that I have an expert on the line with me that's going to talk to us today about active shooter response. Miss Carolyn Ramsey Hamilton, a risk expert from riskandsecuritylllc.com. And Carolyn and I spoke in Orlando, and I thought it'd be great to get her back on the show with our new studio here and all our newfangled technology, because Carolyn's going to actually try to do a PowerPoint for us today, more or less, right, Carolyn? Kind of show some people some of the stuff. Yeah, I think it's really good. So welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Now, tell us about your company, why it's a little different, why it's a little unique, so people understand what you're doing.
Well, what I do that's a little different and what the company does is we deal in risk assessment, all kind of risk assessments. And so we use algorithms and computer programs that we develop from scratch to look at scenarios like active shooter, market risk, environmental facilities risk assessments, HIPAA risk assessments, IT risk assessments, any kind of assessment that I've even written a model for the Department of Interior to use in doing assessments on all their 77,000 dams across the United States.
77,000?
77,000. That's my big cocktail party question. You know, I walk up to some good-looking person and I say, do you know how many dams there are about in the U.S.? They say
I know how many dams there are not in California.
I say dams.
Yeah, because we're
exactly. That's why it's so fun to talk about dams and the dam regulations and the dam risk assessments and the dam, dam rules and all that stuff.
We're dying of thirst here in California because those idiots won't build another dam. So that's interesting. There's 77,000 of them. Not here though. Apparently,
well, some of them are natural dams too. It's not just all. It's just not all big giant dams like the Hoover Dam, you know.
So I like this algorithm thing. I wrote an article years ago about, I called it "How to Catch a Terrorist Without Hurting Anybody's Feelings," and I said, look, you know, if a bad guy came to a theme park and he was a single male and he bought a ticket an hour before, you could write a program that said that's an anomaly, and now we should do something about it. You know, because most people who go to theme parks are mom or dad or mom and the kids or that kind of thing.
That's right.
So let's talk about how we apply an algorithm to an active shooter profile, because a lot of people will say that active shooters are not preventable. I completely disagree with that.
I completely disagree also.
Yeah, I think, are you disagreeing to disagree or agreeing to disagree? I can't remember which one. You agree with me?
We're agreeing to agree.
Okay, good. Excellent.
I'm trying to keep track here.
Well, it's hard on this show sometimes because we don't really know what we're talking about sometimes. So, yeah, I think that not only is this stuff preventable, it's predictable to some degree, right? If you look at behavior and stuff. So I'm going to kind of let you run your stick here and tell us how this works, because I think people are going to find this interesting. The common belief I think that's still out there is we can only respond to these things. I completely disagree with that, and I think you have a better way to do it. So let's hear how it works. Now, Mr. Jarvis, our engineer. Hello, Mr. Jarvis. How are you? Oh, you're not on the microphone. I can't banter with you today. That's okay. Mr. Jarvis, Carolyn, when you give him a slide number, he's going to push the button, and we'll see how we can get this up on the screen so people can watch it online.
Okay, we can do number 2.
All right. There we go. All right, good. All right.
Okay, so you can see that slide from where you are?
Oh, no, all I see is a little box. So you just go ahead and just
this is just a little about my background.
Yeah, yeah, well, tell us.
I started out, interestingly enough, doing political campaigns.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, before they had computers, really. And so what I was doing was I was creating algorithms to use in Lotus 1, 2, 3.
I remember Lotus.
Anybody
1, 2, 3.
remembers what that is? Yeah, I know, it's crazy.
Well, it was a very easy program to write code in. That's what the advantage was in it. If you could do it.
That's right.
Yeah.
But what I would do is I would hire a bunch of this is for the political stuff. Hire a Sierra Club volunteer, pay them $6 an hour, borrow somebody's phone bank, like a realtor who has like 24 lines going out of their office. And then on Sundays in afternoons, we would poll all these people, get the precinct list with their phone number on it, would call them up. What's your most important issue? Is it crime or is it snow removal? Hello, Mr. So-and-so, what's your important issue? What's your favorite, is it crime or is it education? And so we would target all these variables, and then how old are you and how long have you lived here and blah, blah, blah. It all goes together. And that's where you apply the algorithm. So if they care about crime and they also care about restoring the library and they're over 50, that means something,
Yeah.
And so I ran a campaign for somebody. I also did Sonny Bono's campaign for mayor of Palm Springs. That was a lot of fun. In that same time period, I did a lot of assembly, mayor campaigns and things like that. So somebody who I got elected worked in the Pentagon. when computers were first there. And they said, you know, you have a pretty cool way you do this with these surveys and talking to people and getting the input back from the employees, so you can find out if 3 of them know what they're doing out of 10, or it's whether 7 know what they're doing out of 10. And also they send little notes back on these things, reporting on all the stuff that nobody told me, you know. Like somebody got shot here last week over a girl. Great news, I didn't know that. So went out to Washington, D.C. and started working for the Defense Department, building risk assessment models for the first computers they had.
What year was this? How long ago was this?
1986.
Interesting. Yeah, computers.
Wow.
I mean, people were barely on the internet back then. Yeah.
Yeah. It was just brand new, and they were the first assessment I ever did was one for the Washington Navy Yard about whether they should move these mainframes out. They had them actually sitting on a dirt floor. Out. I'm not kidding.
I'm not surprised.
Out in a building, an outbuilding someplace. And they wondered if that was a problem, you know, and of course it was an enormous problem. Yeah. And then get these out of here right now. And then the second one was patent and trademarks. And they were just starting to, they had a background of patents from, you know, 300 years back, handwritten on napkins and things like that. And they wanted to copy them all, right, and put them on the big platters that they had then, and before it was digital. And so they're going to put them on all these platters. And I did the risk assessment to decide whether they should do an additional backup copy at the same time. If they're going to take, you know, thousands of documents and make 1 copy, why not make 2 and put the second copy in a limestone cave someplace?
Now, that's interesting. You're doing a risk assessments for things that are non-security related.
Correct. That's how I started.
Physical security, right.
Oh, yeah.
So what I think is interesting is that this sort of thinking, and it is thinking, right? Not guessing.
It's analytical thinking is what it is.
Applies to all kinds of things, not just security.
Yeah, and I'd worked in maritime too. I worked in I was on the Maritime Security Council. In fact, I won the Distinguished Service Award for the council.
John, are you impressed with that? Because John's a maritime police officer.
Well, I'm sure we probably know all the same people.
Yeah, it's not a very big community.
No, it isn't. Yes.
All right, so you're at the Pentagon. You're working with the Navy Yard. You're doing these risk assessments for non-security related thing. And how did you parlay this into physical security and homeland security and such?
Because they had no way to do it themselves, so they asked me, would this work on dams, for example? Oh yeah, it would work on dams really good, you know. And so if you could go to slide number 4.
All right. Now, since it's radio, we do have to talk in between.
I know we do. You can talk in between when I'm not talking. Okay. Or John can jump right in there.
Thank you.
I had somebody tell me once about the port. So they had the new when they had the new transportation workers identification card.
Oh yeah, the trip cards. Yeah. Yeah,
and they said they said the people they had this big fight over, you know, should we allow felons to work, you know, on the wharfs and the docks and things like that. And, you know, if they're a convicted felon, that was the question. Right. And it was one of the guys said that I knew from Coast Guard at the time said, you know, if you take all the convicted felons off the docks, you have no workers left.
I know, it'd be empty.
Yeah, it's not even an option.
Yeah.
So just sort of knowing what you're dealing with. But so I started with the Defense Department. So I did a lot of things. I did a lot of different risk scenarios for the Defense Department for a long time, and especially after 9/11. And I also worked with Admiral Pluta, who was, I think, at the Navy then, and helped write a guideline after 9/11 for some of this anti-terrorist stuff. So, but what I saw was that people were having trouble with the active shooter, especially in healthcare. That's how I sort of got into the healthcare part of it. But I've also done, I designed a model for medication error in children for Philadelphia Children's Hospital. You know, I designed a program for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on emergency preparedness. And that's was probably, 6 years ago, but it's when they started looking at active shooter and saying, why are we leaving this in security with just the security people? It needs to be expanded out, include all the emergency planners who are sitting back in their offices, writing tomes on hurricanes and tornadoes and all these things, when active shooter could happen anywhere, anytime, and it's really not, a natural disaster. It's not geographically related.
Now, we talked on the last show about the hospitals.
Yes.
People don't realize that there's a lot more that goes on in hospitals than is reported in the news. For whatever reason, and I'm not sure if that's because of HIPAA, it has to be more protected or confidential, I'm not really sure, but some hospitals unto themselves are complete cities where there's, I know from UCLA when I worked up there, you bring in a guy that was stabbed in a gang shooting. That doesn't make any sense, does it, drivers?
No.
Well, he could have been, I suppose. Anyway, who was injured in a gang-related thing. Then the gang comes in and tries to finish him off. So there's a lot of violent crime inside hospitals. Patients go wacky and so on.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah, we had drive-bys, we're standing by doing gang investigations. Drive-bys in the hospitals.
Well, that's right. As they're pulling them off the gurney to get in, yeah.
Exactly.
So, Carolyn, if that was going on for a long time in the hospitals, why weren't these sort of best practices kind of put into place there? Is it just because of the way they collect data, or they don't want to tell people about it, or what?
Well, if you look at the whole active shooter thing, number one, it's a new phenomenon. I think they had the first what they classified as an active shooter event in 2000.
No, that's not really true. Now, that's interesting you should say that, because Paul and I did a whole show on we did school shootings. We want to say, how long has this been happening? And they go back to the 1700s when a teacher, strangled a child because the child killed his bird by accident, and the dad came in with his musket and busted a cap on the teacher. So,
really?
Oh, yeah, it goes back quite a ways.
It probably does, but not in any numbers. Maybe once every other year or something like that.
It's increased. There's no doubt about it.
Now it's up to like 60 a year.
Well, and I think it's interesting they call it an active shooter. I never quite understood why they use that term, because if you're shooting, you're active. But I think what it means is you're not going to stop until somebody stops you. I think that's what they mean, as opposed to I'm going to walk in.
It's a term, too.
Yeah.
It's got to be the term, because like Kent State, that was an active shooter.
Right.
He was in a bell tower, shooting. But look at carjacking. It was never considered a carjacking. It was a robbery GTA,
Grand Theft Auto, right.
Somebody coined that phrase. So I think that has a lot to do with not tracking, those incidents either.
Now, in the hospitals where you're going to build this algorithm for them, what was the selling point? Because if they didn't understand they had active shooters, did they call them something else? Was it
no? They called them active shooters. And I just wanted to say recently, and you probably know this better than I do, John, but recently the FBI put out a document about active shooter, and they reclassified what an active shooter is. So before this document came out, an active shooter was somebody who kills or injures 3 or more people.
Oh,
and
3 or more?
Yeah, well, that's what it was before.
Oh, okay, all right.
Now they just changed it last fall to say that anybody who goes out to kill or injure random people in a confined and populated area is an active shooter, even if they're using a machete or a hatchet,
yes.
Right?
Well, leave it to the government to muck it all up.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with that little analysis is that, from what I've studied, and again, Security Guy Radio is not always right, but not often wrong, about...
We'll see.
Okay, well, I want to be challenged. Okay. Oh, I don't know. There's a component of 30+% that involve domestic violence in active shooters, where pissed off ex-husband comes and kills wife at there was a pretty famous shooting in Chicago on Thanksgiving back in couple years ago, right?
This last year at Nordstrom's.
Nordstrom's, that's right. So
on Black Friday, Black Friday.
Okay, so that's not random people. So that does not fit the definition of an active shooter, according to
Well,
that.
very rarely. They don't count domestic violence as an active shooter.
Okay, that's a problem.
If they counted domestic violence, would have 900 a year, instead of 60.
That's its own classification. They don't break anything out of domestic violence.
That's right.
Well, I think they have to, because it's workplace violence. And
if it's a guy goes to work and kills his wife who's a nurse, it counts as domestic violence on the OSHA filing.
But if I kill my wife and all her girlfriends,
then it would be active. then it would be an active shooter.
I have a Security Guy Radio headache, I must say.
I know.
Okay, all right. So at least they're trying. I suppose I should be happy for that.
All right. Here's sort of what I think about sort of active shooter, and the reason I wanted to mention it on your show, the font of all security wisdom, is because
more like a cesspool. But go ahead.
Yeah, they had those three shootings, like right in a 5-week period. They had three shootings.
Right.
And that's what that chart was about. It was showing, these three shootings, one in Charleston where the 21-year-old guy walked in, sat in the prayer meeting for an hour, and then shot 9 people in the head and turned himself into the police. And in the next one, like a few weeks later, it was the Chattanooga one at the recruiting station, where this guy who was having to file bankruptcy and his girlfriend had left him, and he did have an Arab name, but they never found a link, went to the recruiting station and shot up the first recruiting station in his car. He never got out of the car, the Navy recruiting station. Then he went to the second recruiting station 10 minutes away, and that's where he killed the 5 Marines and was shot by the Chattanooga police when he came out the other side of the building after killing all the people. And then the third one was the one in the Lafayette Theater shooting.
Yeah.
Right. And the most interesting thing to me about all 3 of those, and it totaled to be like 30 people all together who were killed and injured, was that all of these took place in less than a minute.
Oh, yeah. That's.
And so, see, law enforcement can't get there in time anymore.
No, the average response for law enforcement is 8 minutes roughly, and an average shooting is 1 to 4.
That's right.
And every minute, 2 to 3 people are killed at the guy's shooting. So, like
Yep.
at Virginia Tech, longer shooting, more head count. So it has nothing to do with a protective model or response model, because it just won't happen. So
That's
we
right.
need another solution, and it's amazing that people still respond to this problem with, first responder solutions, and when it really has to be individual response or prediction, which people don't like to use, because if I don't predict it, they're afraid they're going to get sued. Oh, you didn't predict it. I'm going to sue you. Why didn't you predict it?
Yeah, but I think you can predict it based on what's happened in the past, even if it's not your building, your facility, your airport where it happens. You can say the ones that have tried at other airports, and if you have 10, if in 1 year you have 10 airports that have wannabe active shooter incidents or thwarted active shooter incidents, then I think you got a higher percentage. You're going to have one at your airport eventually.
Okay, now that's a good way to look at that. Now, my predictability model would be based on cognitive aggression, where I'm thinking about shooting you, and there's signs early on in the workplace where I've foreshadowed that with nasty grams or sending things to your boss or trying to get you in trouble. So that's a whole nother area of predictability. Your predictability, explain that to me, because this is going to be based on probabilities, based on some numbers, and tell us how that works.
It's based on a couple things. It's based on what kind of incidents you've had at your facility first. Have you ever had somebody come in with a gun? Have you ever had an active shooter incident? Have you ever had, how many assaults do you have every year? How many workplace violence incidents do you have? Not just the workplace violence, but, where somebody's violent. Not just a bullying incident, but an actual acting out kind of an incident, which they have every day at restaurants and Air Force bases and, everywhere else. So looking at how many of those you've had or how many you've got at your location, but also at all other similar locations. And that's where you can get into these national statistics about what's happened in every hospital, and they have really good stats for that. What happens in the schools, they have really good stats for that, because it's government controlled. Government has a lot of compliance issues with hospitals and with schools. So those are the ones who get all the attention, and those are the ones who do the assessments and the drills and the training, and it's because they have to. I don't think they would do half of what they do if they weren't required,
So one of the...
Oh no, well they won't report unless you tell them, because, and this is all, it's all based on people that actually, that the things that are reported, or you can't even do any assessment, because there's, if somebody says nothing ever happens, then it's useless. You know what I mean? So it really just goes to show people how important it really is to report anything and everything, just so you can get it down on paper.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the models I teach are based on behavior recognition. And what you're telling me is there's a different model besides behavior. I
don't think behavior works very well. And I agree with John that the reporting is so key. So let's pick an airline example. Let's pick the last active shooter they had at LAX who killed a TSA worker. Remember that?
Right.
And in that one, they knew way in advance, because the parents had been calling the local police for 3 years, telling their kid was going to kill somebody at LAX.
Okay, but that's behavior.
Well, it wasn't reported.
Right.
So, I mean, if we reported everybody's behavior, people would be busy 100% of the time looking at these people. But they called and the police ignored it. And then they called again and the police ignored it. And they called again and they actually sent somebody out to the house to pick this kid up or at least talk to him 15 minutes after he had already taken off for the airport to kill somebody.
Okay, so just so I can break this down in my small reptilian brain.
Okay.
We have behavior recognition patterns, which is people and behavior, and a lot of proponents of that think that works. I happen to be one of them to some degree. But let's break yours down into something really specific. You're saying that behavior is part of an incident, and incidents need to be gathered and collated and analyzed. That's your predictability model. Is that a good way to say it?
That's one way to say it, yeah.
Okay, give me a better way to say it then, because
because it's not. The problem is most of these people that show up shooting,
yeah,
especially like in the hospitals, like those examples we talked about the guy whose mother died in November last year, in January 21st, freezing and weather in Boston, he decides to put on his big heavy coat, go up to the hospital and kill the doctor because his mother died.
Right.
3 months earlier. He's never done one bad thing. He's never been arrested. He's never jaywalked. He's never gotten a ticket. He just, and I think sort of a lot of this is my active shooter baby boom, where everybody always assumes these guys are young and they lock themselves up in the room watching video games. No. They're like upstanding citizens, like the guy in Lafayette. They got nothing to live for. And they have this idea. I think some of them don't want to kill themselves. They're chicken. They want to, but they can't. So they're going to have the police do it for them.
I think that's about 80-something%. Wind up having the police kill them or they kill themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it's interesting you should say that about the predictability of a guy whose mom just dies in the hospital and he blames the doctor. Okay. Mm-hmm. Let's say I'm working at the studio and I have an incident happen. We would categorize events as something significant that could give rise to a response. Just as a generic kind of a thing, right? Yeah, right. So I could see that. And Paul and I don't know, several months ago when this whole Obamacare thing came out and when my insurance went from the Cadillac plan to the Alka-Seltzer plan, and it cost me twice as much, by the way. All right, I had to pay twice as much that I was paying before, and they canceled it and gave me another one. I kind of was not happy about that. And I said, you know what, Paul, we're going to see people that are in the middle of cancer treatment, and now their insurance gets canceled, and they're going to get new insurance, and it's not going to cover something, and they're going to say, you know what, I got nothing to lose, I'm pissed off, and they're going to start going into hospitals and busting a cap at the doctor. We predicted that. That was because to me, that's a logical extension of an event, right?
Right.
It's behavior, but it's not driven by behavior. The event creates the behavior. See what I'm saying?
Or in some cases, an event triggers a behavior that may manifest itself 3 years later.
That's right, and that
it's
behavior,
not an immediate thing.
Not immediate, and that behavior may not have ever manifested itself had it not been for that intervening event that was life-changing for somebody or catastrophic or whatever, which is a little different than I'm pissed off at John because he took my job at the port and I'm going to get him.
That's
completely different. Completely different.
But to me, the thing now, why? Okay, so we got that part of it.
So how do you build an algorithm for that? There's the question.
Well, because you have to have more in it than just one number. So the next thing we added is the threat likelihood where you are.
Now, is that just based on crime stats, that kind of thing?
It can be based on crime stats. It could also be based, again, on industry statistics.
Okay.
How many doctors botch a vasectomy, and how many people who have and this happened in Reno, Nevada a year ago. If they have problems with their vasectomy, so they're left with horrible pain, and for 3 years they write letters to the doctor and say, I'm still in horrible pain, and the doctor does nothing. The guy shows up at the clinic with a rifle and a handgun. And he walks in the door with both his weapons in open, just right there. And the receptionist does not have a panic alarm. She doesn't have a secret button to press. I really don't expect like a 27-year-old receptionist named Myrtle to stand up to a guy walking in with a rifle.
It's not going to do anything. The police are going to take 10 minutes to get there anyway. So.
And the police are on campus, but they're never going to get there anyway. So, you have to say, okay, how many times has this happened in our industry? In this kind of a situation, and how likely is it to happen here? Well, if you have decent access control, maybe it's not so likely to happen there. That's when you get into the controls. So those are the three elements. One of them is what you're protecting and whatever you know about what's happened in the past. And then we have the threats that are out there all the time, right? This could happen anytime. And we want to get a number for how often that happens. And then it's the controls. What percentage? Here's my list of 65 controls you should have in place so you would have less chance of an active shooter.
Right.
How many have you got in place? And are they really implemented?
So the 65 controls are going to lower your probability that something's going to happen.
Right.
Okay.
But they also reduce the likelihood of it happening.
Right.
If somebody has the impulse and they walk in and they have to go through a metal detector, they're not going to get their gun in. To me, it's easier to keep them out in the first place.
Well, that's right.
And keep the guns out.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Now, is that more preventative than predictive then, or a combination really?
I think it's more. I think you can predict what's going to happen if you combine the threat potential with the controls in place.
Now, how do you look at emerging crimes, emerging trends, emerging panic?
Oh, we put the we.
If you don't, in other words, we don't have stats for it yet, right? Paul and I thought that for sure people are going to start killing their doctors when their insurance gets canceled. Were we correct? They didn't, though.
Because having your insurance canceled is bad, but it's a financial thing. It's not an emotional thing like having your mommy die when you're 55 years old.
Okay, that's a good point. Right. So if my insurance is canceled and my wife dies because you didn't pay the bill and get the doctors to help her, that's a different story.
Right.
So it could be okay. All right.
But it's like they don't shoot the gas meter guy, because you get a bill.
Right.
But several years ago we did see where fathers were taking matters into their own hands, saying that they were failing their families and themselves, and we had several family suicide, murder suicides, all by the fathers. And I'm not talking one. I think there was like 7 in 2007 or 2008. Just in Southern California.
Yep.
All right. So if we have something like that as a trend, and then that trend disappears, and let's stick with hospitals because that's something that you have an expertise in. How does that affect your algorithm? So we had 500 emergency room incidents, and 10% are related to gangs, and 20% are psychotic medicine, whatever. And now those patterns drop off. Does your algorithm stay consistent in the predictability factor? In other words,
well, yeah, you can adjust it all the time.
You have to adjust it all the time to be current data, right?
Well, to data, yeah, like meteor showers. Remember the meteor shower we had over Russia, over Siberia, when they had a meteor that hit close to there and it blew out all the windows of every building in the town had all the windows blown out and stuff. That was only like 5 years ago. But suppose we had another one this year, and suppose we had 2 next year, and suppose we had 5 the year after that. If you're not looking at these things in a statistical way, you miss the trend. But if you're tracking them in cities everywhere, then you see what's happening. We're getting worse. We had 1 last year, 2 this year, 3 this year, 4 next year, So you have to be, and drones are another, right?
Oh, that's coming. I saw.
Yeah, that's coming.
Yes.
Of course, I saw that coming when I had my Cox airplane back in 1972, because it was a simple technology. But really, if you extend that concept, when Cox airplanes became wireless and they weren't floating on strings, you could just say, something's going to happen on that. I'm surprised it actually took so long, by the way.
And by the way, just almost hit a hospital helicopter yesterday, I think. I missed it by 20 feet.
Yeah, and then we reclassified.
And they were transporting somebody who was dying.
Oh, it's a problem. And they call them drones now because drones have a more sinister name to them. But really, it's just a remote control wireless helicopter. But I guess you can call it a drone.
Yeah.
All right, so I get this part where we're looking at past statistics to predict future behavior.
Okay, so we want to get as many data points, right? So
exactly, that's the trick, right?
We've got the past. We got what's happening in our facility. We've got what's happening in our industry. We've got the level of controls that are in place. So we know if we have a metal detector or if we have a sign that says no weapons. And again, people say, well, that's stupid. What's a sign going to do? But for nothing for a 19-year-old kid who's going to go to a Bible study and kill everybody. But for somebody who's 60 years old and has 4 kids in a nice house, and always did everything right, they might be stopped by a sign like that.
I want that guy, but I want that guy inside the facility when the crazy guy has his gun, frankly. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
I want the responsible guy in there. So I think, no gun signs actually cause a bigger problem. That's a different story, but.
Well, maybe.
All right. So these numbers you're crunching, they sound to me, what's the lack of a better term? Like what an actuary does, insurance guys analyzing risk.
Exactly.
Is it very similar, by the way?
Very similar. Risk analysis, yeah.
Okay.
It's very similar to that. And then we had one more little piece of information here, and that is, what do the people on the ground think is going on? So just like John said earlier about, how well people take actions, and are they still doing it, 3 days after you had the seminar? Can they even remember the 3 things that you talked about in the active shooter training? Gun, person, death. Very good. But anyway, so you can talk about those kind of things. And
so you'll do a survey of people in the facility to get this data?
Yes, survey people. Instead of interviewing them like they used to do, sit down and have in-depth interviews with 5 people on a staff that has 5,000 people. Instead, we do the web-based surveys, right? Which you can send out to 1,000 people in 1 minute or less. And they can answer the questions, and the questions are based on requirements like the Maritime Transportation MTSA, Maritime Transportation Security Act, or HIPAA, or the nuclear, what is the new one? NERC, SIP 14 for facilities.
So are these standardized questions? Are they like check boxes? So all the answers
are all standardized questions, and they all say, tell us, on a scale of 1 to 5, how often you do this, Chuck. If 1 means you never do it, 5 means you do it every single day, or 3 means sometimes you do it and sometimes you don't. And if it doesn't apply to you, hit NA, and if you don't know the answer, say, I don't know.
Right.
So now, instead of just your input from where you see it, as part of the corporate structure, now you're getting the information from the maintenance people and the clinical staff and the teachers or the doctors, all these people. And they're the ones who say, oh, by the way, the employee entrance, the strike bar on the door is broken, so it's never closed.
Now, is this data in the survey anonymous?
No.
Oh, that's interesting. I think anonymous might be more accurate because people tend to maybe say something differently to want to go with the group, right? Oh,
I don't think so, actually.
No? All right.
And I think because active shooters become more common, that people really don't want to get shot and killed going or coming from work. And they have enough, there's so many of these media things that have happened and been publicized that I think they want to help. And they're probably sitting around there going, what is this company's security department doing? They're just not doing it right. I wish I could tell them a thing or two, and here's this person's chance to tell us.
That's interesting. When I teach,
and they do. They're flattered to be asked.
Yeah, when I teach some of these classes, the first hour is blank stares, and then after a while, people loosen up and start saying, "Well, Sally over there in accounting was shooting rubber bands at the boss the other day and putting little pictures of guns on the screen." True story, by the way. True story.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding. We don't kid around here in Security Guy.
Where was she putting the little pictures of guns?
On her boss's computer screen.
Wow.
Yeah, and nobody thought that was a particularly strange behavior that they had to do anything about. And my first thought was, well, she's having an affair with the boss, right? I mean, it just seems like she's really, really mad about something. And why would she think she can do that and not have repercussion? Only way you could get away with that is if you're, doing the boss on this side, and then all of a sudden he has to say, I can't do anything about it.
Yep.
So in those cases, there was a hesitation to report that. And one person said it, and then the subsequent classes I taught, which were probably, I think, 4 more classes of groups of 50 each. In 2 of the groups, they knew all about this incident, and the other 3 groups did not know anything about the incident. So it had gone through the company to some degree, then stopped, right? So to your point, I think it's going to be a mixture. I think an anonymous survey may be more accurate, just my personal opinion, but you know more about that than I do the extra, just for that reason, because people don't want to rat out the boss or rat out somebody because it's going to cause them, in their mind, more trouble. And I think more people do things to avoid pain than they do to seek pleasure. I mean, that's kind of, the kind of way to look at it.
I think it depends on the subject, because like if you take active shooter and they don't want it to ever happen, I could see Carolyn's point. But talk about drugs, you're not going to get any response from people
Well, I can see. Well, that's a good point. Yeah, because
you know.
they may be part of the culture themselves, and they don't want to do anything about it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I really think it's just subject to specific, or crime specific.
So, how many data fields do you wind up having, Carolyn, after you start the survey?
We've got about five, and then that's where the algorithm comes in, because it says if they answered this and they're in this department and this is the crime rate for that area, and we have a history of this happening, then these essential controls. So, like five essential access controls, for example, because again, better to keep them out than get them in. If those aren't in place, then the incident likelihood of them having something happen is a lot higher. And then you look at the survey responses, and they don't dictate the whole thing. But if you do a survey and you find out that nobody in the company knows anything about access control procedures, then or they're not using them. They know about them, but they're not using them. Or another common thing we find is they know they're supposed to be doing it, but they were never trained.
Right.
Or this has become the practice. It's not, even though there's a procedure and a policy out about it.
That's right.
Yeah, and the practice becomes the policy, frankly. And
that's right.
And by the way, people become very, very good at not doing something. They become experts at not doing something, and that's the problem. That's a very hard pattern to break.
Yeah, it is. But at least you know about it. So if you find out, so say one place I went had just put like big manufacturer, Midwest, they just put this whole program, like $1 million training program, and nobody ever taken the program. Why not? Well, we only get that program during orientation. Well, how long have you been with the company? 18 years. It's really, you got your security briefing 18 years ago, And
that was it. That's all the follow-up they got.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you see it all the time.
But you don't know it. And that's why doing an assessment is a good idea, because it narrows all these fields down. And the other thing I would say is if you ask these people what they think and you include the list, you don't even have to include their actual answers, but at least that they were part of the process. It makes them feel like they're contributing, and their boss takes it more seriously. So that means the security department or emergency preparedness has a better chance of getting funded, because he goes, Sally said that, I can't believe it, I thought she was our best employee. I thought she loved security, And now he finds out she's not doing any of these things.
Okay, you're starting to sway me. I'm coming to your side a little bit. Little bit. I'm still on human behavior recognition. However, I see your point that you really need to combine those things, because if I have the ability, let's say I'm really, really good, and I just know that John is going to go wacky tomorrow because it's my intuition, it's my experience. But John, this as a cop. Cops can look at somebody.
We just found out he used to work with TSA. So I mean, he's helped start TSA. So isn't that enough?
Yeah, that's right. That could be a whole pattern right there. So if I can see that, I may be able to do something about it. But to your point, no matter what the organization, if the things you're talking about are not in place, and I don't know if they are because I haven't done the survey and I haven't done the algorithm, then it doesn't matter what I predict. I'm not going to have the tools to stop the guy, probably,
That's right.
Or slow him down, or recognize him when he gets here and things like that. So,
or you may spend your money on things that don't matter while you're missing the point.
Exactly.
Because you didn't ask these other 2,000 people, and they didn't give you the benefit of their wisdom,
So let's say you came to John, and John's secret superhero life is enforcing things at the ports. All right, that's what John does for a living now. John, are you convinced with this? Would you want to use this process in the ports? Would it work in a multifaceted facility?
I have to admit that I've actually used it, not at the ports, but I have used it in other algorithms, and I was not a believer, and they work very, very well. I was totally shocked, but yes, I do have to agree with them, and that they would work in any field as long as the information that is provided is accurate information. I sit here and kind of smile that in the end we go back to what is a basic investigation. When you end up going out and talking to this person next door, that person out in the field or whatever, you get that information, which is some of the best information, and now you put that in this this program and the algorithm, and you end up getting some pretty good results. I do believe in it, Chuck. I didn't, but I'm probably the last 7 or 8 years I've been a really big believer in it.
And the other thing is, Chuck, is that there aren't enough hours in the day for these security guys to go out to their 87 facilities every year and do an assessment. So what happens if they can't do it? If they they could cut that down to 2 days with technology, and that means that they get to visit every facility once every 5 years.
Yeah, even if the MTSA says you have to, you end up doing the most important ones first, and then you end up skipping them every other year or something because it's so long that you don't have the time to do any, or you don't have the manpower.
Well, that's right.
Back in the day at Fox, we had a guy come to us, Jim Stinson. He did a lot of early database analysis stuff, and he created a thing called Magic. It's called a Magic database, and it's basically what Google does now. You go on Google and you type in 2 or 3 words in Boolean code and say, Carolyn and Ramsey and Hamilton and Country Club, and then we get an answer, right? Well, he could do a search like that for 25 ways up and 25 ways sideways, and you would put all your data that you collected into his database. They'd run that, and you'd find information. And he had a famous case in Orange County. I don't remember, John. This was 20-something years ago. The Orange County deputy that was shot by a guy on a motorcycle. Remember that case?
Oh yes, yeah. I remember that.
So was that Green River?
No, it was Orange County, California. I think it was Orange County deputies. I think, but
it was. I thought it was at Garden Grove. It was. Anyway, yeah, I remember the case.
Yeah. So the big task force as usual get out here and find this guy and look for him, and too much data to gather, John. So to your point, you go out and do the field investigation, gather all this data, then somebody has to sit down there, the head detective, hopefully that has a memory like a computer, and put it all together and figure it out. That's the old school. Well, the Magic database came in, put the stuff in a database, and they went on for quite a while, maybe like a year, trying to figure out what happened. And when Stinson came in and said, hey, I'm running this data, and I'm telling you right now, we got something here. Somebody did an FI card, field interview card, right? And on a field interview card, it said that, suspect John Doe has a motorcycle. And the sergeant running the task force says, nope, that guy doesn't have a motorcycle. I know he doesn't. We've already checked that out. He's not the suspect. He's not the guy. And Jim Stinson said, that's your guy. That's your shooter based on the analysis of the data. And the sergeant on the task force said, well, who told you that? Well, who said that this guy had a motorcycle? He looks at it and says, you did. You wrote it down on the FI card a year ago.
His own data.
His own data on the FI card. He just forgot, right? No knock on the guy. That's just what happens, right?
No, but he just didn't have a framework to put it into.
He didn't, and so this database cracked that case. That guy was arrested and convicted based on that analysis. So that is not a predicting database analysis. That's after the fact, but it's the same way. Yours works the same way, just in reverse.
Right, it's just analytical.
Right.
And the other thing that's good about it, I think, is that when you have 10 different investigators and they're all going out, like for the ports, when there's so many ports, so many small ports, so many ports on rivers, so many ports around the world, and you can't get to all of them, and the people who go out and do them all have different backgrounds. One's an ex-Secret Service guy, one's ex-law enforcement, one's ex-military intelligence, right? So they all have their own way to do it, and they do it their own way. So you can't really correlate these three ports, these three of these ports these guys went to, because they're all working on a slightly different model based on their previous training and intelligence. Right. So if you use a machine to do it, a computer program, an algorithm or an app, make it into an app, then the results are transferable, or at least comparable, right? So now you can look at all these ports and say, well, gee, obviously, because they're judged on the same factors. This one has the highest threat.
Yes, exactly. That's the important thing, is that it has assigned the same threat to each of these things, where a human brain, depending on where you come from and what you've done, you assign it your own in your head. So a one for this guy could be a 5 for the next guy, which would throw the whole process off.
That's right. And same thing with the controls. You can say, okay, this is the port that's had the least of any kind of all incidents combined. This port's had the least incidents over the last 3 years. This port's had the most. And then you can say, okay, well, what does this port do? What controls does this port have in place that the other one doesn't? And so you can build on it over time too. So it also helps security and management to see if you're continual improvement, right? Are you going uphill or are you going downhill?
Yeah. Yes. helps a lot in risk assessments. If you don't have a lot of time, you can just run those algorithms, one from look at last year's results, look at this year's, and if you believe in them, you can really get through them much quicker.
Now, Mr. Jarvis, my engineer, was giving me some fingers, not the fingers you're thinking, but time management fingers.
Okay.
We got Mr. Jarvis.
Well, happy about that.
No, well, I'm learning. We don't, I can't see the clock in here the same way, and I'm trying to time everything. We got how many more minutes, Mr. Jarvis? We got about 3 more minutes. Well, you tell me when we stop. It's up to you. About 4 more minutes. Okay, we got our 4 more minutes, Carolyn. So let's try and wrap it up a little bit and get to the meat and potatoes here. So, how does this? I mean, here's what I get. I get that we're looking at predictability for making sure that your access control system is actually working when you found out it wasn't working. So now we can make it work. And
right.
Now we know that employees are participating, whereas before employees were not participating. I get all that part. I can see how that can prevent damage from any active shooter because now you're in compliance with your own rules and regulations and you have time barricades and physical restraints and things like that. How does that, though, predict a shooter per se? I can see it predicting the probability of you surviving better, right? But how do we put the human factor in there to say that, look, all these things together mean that this guy right here may be the guy?
We don't. Well, I will say we do not go down to the individual guy level.
Okay, that's fair.
We don't do that.
Okay.
I mean, what we do is take it, aggregates of all this information, and then run it through, so that they can get their assessments done in less time.
Okay, so that data is going to say that somebody has a high probability of coming in here and doing this.
That's right.
Okay, listen, that's closer than we get on most things, right? So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then now, what do you think about this? If we took your algorithms and by the way, is this a mobile app?
Yes.
So is this exclusive for your company? Do you make this?
Yes, we make this. It's called Risk Pro. It's an app called Risk Pro.
Oh, excellent. So we get that on your website?
Yes.
Okay. So we took Risk Pro and then we combined something like, the behavior recognition from the people side of it. I think that'd be a very powerful combination. Because
I think it'd be great.
Yeah. So I'm sold now. I was a little skeptical. Not skeptical.
You're tough. You're tough. That's what you are.
Well, but my perspective is, and I used to tell this to people all the time when Clinton was running for president. I said, if I stopped that guy for a traffic ticket, I'd find something to take him to jail for. Because I just thought that he told stories, right? I mean, it has nothing to do with morals or values or anything. He's just a storyteller. And by the way, I like the guy. I didn't vote for him, but he's a likable guy. You know what I'm saying? So cops have a good ability to kind of sum somebody up and say, wait a minute, something's right, something's wrong. That's the behavior part. That's now translated into a lot of people that go out like John Burns from Aggressive Management or Gavin DeBecker, and they say, look, let's take that behavior and translate it into something we can measure, give it a number, and say, okay, that guy has a probability of doing something, right?
Yep.
But I think your approach is kind of brilliant in a way that it really fills in a big hole for the part that we don't have a lot of times. Even if we get the person part right, if I don't have that door locked, if I don't have the guard in place, if nobody's trained, it's going to be very difficult to stop the guy. I mean, I think that's...
Or just look at the church. Look at the church one. I mean, the church one. How would anybody have predicted that guy would go to that church?
Well, I don't think you... Well, I take that back. If you go back and break that down, it's always, quarterback time, right? Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah.
He would have told somebody. He probably did tell people. He probably foreshadowed it, so on. But the second he got to the door, the question is...
What happened then?
This doesn't look right. And by the way, how did he get to shoot people in the head? Why wasn't everybody running around saying, I'm not going to get shot in the head? There are all kinds of factors you can analyze it afterward. But the trick is to get to it before. So we got about a minute left. So give us your website, how we can get a hold of you, and give us your app again. And let's get this out there. I think this is really kind of a unique app that people should be using.
And in fact, sometime, Chuck, I'd like you and maybe John too to go out and we'll live and we'll do it in the studio, do a risk assessment for everybody, and they can see how it works.
Oh boy! Well, I'm sure my stalkers. Well, my stalkers are sitting in the green room right now, so that'd be a good idea.
There you go. There you go. Do it on your new studio.
That's right.
You do an assessment on your new studio,
which
of the employees are most likely to go crazy.
Yeah. Well, I would be the first one, not Mr. Jarvis. I'd be the first one. So give us your website. Give us how we can get a hold of you.
Right. Caroline Hamilton, and I'm at riskandSecurityLLC.com. And we also publish a whole program of risk alerts. So it tells you what things to watch out for based on recent events. And there's always something new almost every day. And that's on that website too. And also I'm on Twitter, and you can look up my handle, which Chuck and I communicate on Twitter a lot, and it's Risk Alert. That's my Twitter name.
Boy, that's a good one.
Yeah. So I cover, hurricanes, shootings,
right,
domestic violence.
All right. Excellent.
Wow.
Yeah. Cool.
All right.
Thank you very much for having me, and it was great to meet you, John. And maybe we can touch base tomorrow or something.
Oh, great to meet you too.
Oh. Hold on a second. All right, John. Hold on, Mr. Jarvis. We gotta get this down. All right. Let me just say goodbye, and then we'll play the music.
Okay.
We're gonna. Okay. Goodbye from Security Guy Radio.
Bye. It was fun.
Mr. Jarvis and I'll fix that fade out next week until next Monday at 7 o'clock. Tune in to Security Guy Radio at securityguyradio.com. Get our mobile app. Follow us on SoundCloud, Facebook, Pinterest, the girls' site, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+, and Tumblr. Good night.